Welcome to today's lesson. You will need a composition book for notes and a pen or a pencil. Today we're going to talk about probability. Here's a couple of definitions you need to write down. A sample space is a set of all possible outcomes of an experiment. That is like if you have a coin, what are the possible outcomes? Head and tails. If you have a dice, what are the possible outcomes? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's a sample space. It becomes complicated when you have two things together. An independent event is when the events of the probability do not rely on anything else, and each one is independent of each other or by itself. A dependent event is when you have an event that depends upon what the first probability was, and I'll show you an example of that. To find the probability of anything, you take the number of ways that an event can occur out of the total outcomes. Go ahead and hit pause and copy these down. Okay, so let's take a look at an independent event. What is the probability of landing on a blue in this spinner? Well, another way that you might see what a probability is asking for is it'll have this, P parentheses blue. That means what is the probability of landing on a blue? Well, how many outcomes do I have? 5. How many are blue? 1. My probability is 1 out of 5 or 20%. Let's leave them as fractions right now unless the percent is easy to work. A fraction works every time, so let's just go ahead and leave them in fraction form. All right, what's the probability of pulling a white card from the deck of cards at right? Well, how many cards are there? 8. How many of them are white? 4. So I have 4 out of 8 or 1/2. You need to make sure you reduce it, and so this would be a 50%. I prefer you leave it as a fraction, 1/2. So when you have two probabilities together, you will have a compound event. When you have multiple events, you multiply. For example, what's the probability of getting a striped and a B from these two spinners? Well, my first probability is probability of a striped. That would be 2 out of 5. My second probability is the probability of a B. That would be 2 out of 3. When you have multiple events, you multiply. So 2/5 times 2/3 would be 4/15. So let's take a look at this one. Find the probability of a red and an even. Go ahead and pause and do that. So a red would be 1/2, 2 out of 2, 2 out of 4 is 1/2. An even number on, now this is a dice, they're only showing you 3 sides, you should know there's 6. So there are 3 even numbers out of 6, which would be 1/2 again. So the probability of a red and an even would be multiplying 1/2 times 1/2 is 1/4 or 25%. The next one we're going to talk about is a dependent event. A dependent event means the second probability depends upon the first probability. For example, let's say I had the following cards, and I wanted to know what the probability would be of pulling a white card, keeping it, and then pulling a black card. So let's start with the probability of a white card. What would the probability of a white card be? 3 out of 8. Correct. Now, if I remove a white card, how many are left? Now I have 7 cards. Of those 7 cards, how many are black? 5, so my probability would be 5/7. Do you see how the bottom depended upon what I did in the first one? I took away a white card. So now I still have multiple events, so I've got to multiply. 3/8 times 5/7 would be 15 over 56. Let's try another one. What would be the probability of pulling a black card, keeping it? What would be the probability of pulling a black card, keeping it, and then pulling another black card? Go ahead and hit pause and try this on your own. Okay, so what is my probability of a black? 5 out of 8. But if I remove one of the black cards, how many do I have left? 7. Of those, 4 are black. So my probability would now be 4 out of 7. Multiply 5/8 times 4/7 is 5 out of 14. Remember that you must cross reduce before you multiply. Excellent. So now I want you to try this probability on your own. What is the probability of pulling a green marble from the bag, keeping it, and then drawing a blue bag? I'll see you in class. Have a nice evening.